This episode of the Huddle Breakdown is brought to you in association with the OneFootball app. The OneFootball app is the best football app on the market right now. Everything that you need on any team, in any league, is available in the OneFootball app now. The fixtures, the results, transfer news, and even stats, everything that you need on any team, any league is available in the OneFootball app. And in addition to all these other great features, the OneFootball app is now offering everyone in the UK and Ireland free match highlights from the Serie A every match week. And on top of that, they will have one free selected match on a Saturday, which will be live streaming across the app. So if you want to get all these other great features and get an opportunity to watch some Serie A football on a Saturday, then download the OneFootball app using the link in the description below. You'll be supporting the channel and you'll be getting a top-notch football app as well. Now you're welcome along to the Huddle Breakdown, and to call here with you alongside Alan Morrison and Jaco James as always. A few people in the comments getting restless, so we are finally kicking off just about 5 minutes after the said time of 6 o'clock, but we're here and we're going to be talking about Celtic being 9 points clear at the top of the SFA title going into the World Cup break after their 2-1 win against Ross County. But we're going to kick off with some breaking news from the day, and that is that Joseph Juranovic has reportedly not rejected a Celtic contract, but talks have broken down between him and the club, and the World Cup is going to be a springboard for potentially or starting right back to leave the club. So this was reported widely across the different news organizations. Fabrizio Romano had it, and this could be the moment where one of Ange's first signings leaves the club after the World Cup. He does have the World Cup with Croatia to sort of springboard, and maybe if he has a good one, maybe up that price tag a little bit as well for Celtic. So that's what we're going to kick off with. Alan, if you look at this transfer as a whole, it probably makes sense. It probably is what Celtic intended to do with Juranovic in the first place. Not too often we buy an international player of his stature, and in terms of the international team that he starts in his position for. Celtic signed Juranovic for 2.5 million at the time on a 5-year contract. He was 26 at the time. He's 27 now and has 4 years left in his contract. So what are we thinking in terms of the transfer fee that we would be potentially hoping to accept for this?
Yes, I'll tell you why I was laughing later. First of all, I was a bit skeptical to read about negotiating a new contract when he's got 4 years left on his contract. That seemed rather odd, but the source for this seems to be, got Stephen McGowan in the Mail running with it. Stephen seems to be very well connected in Celtic. So, and as you say, if Fabrizio Romano's got his Twitter account all over it, that seems to be the gold standard these days for transfer gossip. So, if I was looking through the Celtic squad, it would be the one that made the most sense to me. I think, as you alluded to, Enda, I think that's absolutely right, because for many reasons, one is age, really, and the fact that I suspect he will be a starter for Croatia. So in terms of that shot window, it's good timing. And the manager has said quite openly that we need to be much more aggressive about our player trading model. And by more aggressive, it means probably not just more, not just getting better players, but also actually turning over fast, having a bigger turnover. I think the Swiss Ramble analysis of Celtic's accounts, which was done in the week, which is a stunningly thorough piece of work for somebody who has got no skin in the game and does hundreds of football clubs. Actually, it's tremendous. I don't know if it's one person or whether it's an army of them, but it's a tremendous piece of work anyway. There was a very, very telling piece of that analysis which showed that Celtic are, in Scottish terms, remarkably successful in selling players going back 10 years. But in European terms, which should be the benchmark, as James has opined many a time correctly, we're nowhere in terms of just the volume. Selling players for 7 million and 5 million and 3 million and what have you, and the occasional 10 million is great in Scotland in terms of that sort of keeping control in that market. But we're not near the regularly selling a 25 million or a 30 million every year, and you only do that by increasing the rate of churn. getting more players in, selling for higher, getting more players that cost you more to sell for higher. It's a virtuous cycle that you have to get into. So if that's I think it's strategically where we're trying to get to. Juranovic appears to me to be one of the better cases. Not only that, because as well, we've got a more than able deputy in the short term and Tony Ralston. So it does make a lot of sense. I think is what is the bottom line. But it's just a bit odd that it's is he agitating for a move, or is it a bit of push and pull on both sides? I don't know. I'm still a little bit skeptical about that.
I would say Celtic are probably more than happy to use the World Cup to springboard them. Unfortunately for them, Croatia don't really have that strong of a team going into this World Cup as opposed to the last one. So whether or not he'll perform to his best is another question altogether. But James, there's a lot goes into transfer fees in the first place, and there's a lot goes into sort of making these transfers happen. I think firstly you have to look at the precedent in Scotland. What is the record? And that is Kieran Tierney, 27 million, but he was 22 years old. Calvin Bassey, 23 million to Ajax this year, also 22. Juranovic is 27. Now, the four-year deal, that definitely plays into Celtic's hands in terms of the negotiation tactics that they can use in it. But there are only a select few clubs in the world, I would argue, that are going to take a gamble on a 27-year-old right back. And that would be a bigger club rather than a smaller to mid-table club in the likes of the Premier League. That he was linked with Atletico Madrid during the summer. That sounds to me like an Atletico Madrid type signing, a 27-year-old, rather than going for let's use Southampton as the best example of that. They don't buy 27-year-olds, they buy younger players, as do most teams that are trying to use good, smart transfers in order to get value in the market. So this to me sounds like it's a bigger club that are going to come in for Juranovic here.
Yeah, and I think his profile suits something like a playing style of Atletico Madrid, meaning that one of his big attributes is carrying the ball and countering. So that's a kind of textbook Atletico when they're up against the top teams in their league and in European competition. So yeah, I agree with you. I would think it would be, kind of a mid-table Big Five league type of team that would be looking at him. And, that's basically, I mean, they've obviously had a really good run at times in the last, 6-7 years, but that's kind of where they've settled in Spain even. They've kind of fallen out of that top 4 or 5. And, they haven't modernized. They're one of the clubs that, is still kind of sticking to the old ways to a large degree. So I'm very, very manager-centric, old school philosophy. So, yeah, I got a lot of warm embrace back in August by saying we should be selling him and Giakoumakis in August if we could get that kind of money for him. I mean, again, I was heartened to hear Ange's comments because if you can get, let's say, 20-25 million in total for those two players, I mean, that's the aggressive kind of model that Alan's referencing and that Ange mentioned. Because again, you just think about the multiplier effect. You get, let's say 20-25 million, you turn that into three Jotas, or that's what's been. There's only so many Hatates and O'Reillys that we're going to be able to pluck out of the market, right? At some point, we're going to have to start spending money. We've had so many needs, so much of an overhaul required. The depth was so bad last season that, for us to kind of get up that ramp where we're spending 5, 6, 7 million as a matter of course, meaning that we take the Hatate 1 to 2, 3 million and ramp that up to 5, 6, 7. And then the stretch ones like the Jotas then are the 10, 11, 12 million. And I think that's where we should be going in the next year or two, but that requires starting the process of selling some of these names, including Jota, including, and anyone who's not nailed down, which probably is McGregor. Pretty much everyone else for the most parts, probably got a for sale sign, and they should, in this whole process. I'm not saying you sell everybody. I'm just saying that you need to monetize your most attractive assets that make sense. And I think, for the point you guys mentioned, I mean, his profile is, I mean, this is when you sell him. So hit the cash register.
Yeah, I mean, let's be brutally honest about this, right? What we saw in the Champions League is that I would say, and I'm going to get abused for this, but the vast majority of players in the team aren't good enough for that level, and they're clearly very too good for the SPFL. So you could almost sell. You've got to start finding a way to get to that better quality of player if you want to truly compete at Champions League level. We were utterly outclassed by Real Madrid. We gave it a great shot. We were brave. We had a right go, but we were utterly outclassed. I mean, there was an enormous gulf between the two teams. And if we want to start to bridge that gap, we're going to have to start churning the squad and getting, as James said, not the 3 million, 2.5 million little gems. It's the spending 11 million on enormous potential and turning it into 30, 40 million. Frankly, that's the only way we're going to do it. And you got to start
and that's
somewhere.
Yeah, and that's part of the process as well. This first sort of wave of Ange signings, they weren't going to sell for the 35 to 50 million range. You're not bringing in a 2 million player. Very, very rarely you're bringing in a 2 million player and you're selling him for a couple of multipliers of that. We'll probably end up selling Juranovic for the range of 12 to 15 million in the same vein as Christopher Ayer in that aspect. But if you think about the way the transfers work and the way that money works, and this is something that a lot of people don't realize, is that, okay, let's say Atletico Madrid come in for Juranovic and pay us 12 to 15 million. That's not just immediately in your bank account. That'll be worked out in terms of the amount of years it's in his contract, and it'll come in over the course of a number of years. So if Celtic sell Juranovic, for example, and they get in someone on a loan to buy option, and that loan to buy option's 5 to 6 million like Jota was, then Celtic will have that in their accounts the following year in order to make use of that 5 to 6 million they're bringing in. And then a couple of years down the line, they sell that player, sort of like what they're doing with Jota. So this is a long process. It's not going to be, okay, we buy Juranovic, we sell Juranovic, we have Juranovic's replacement. This might be a 2 to 3 year thing where we're bringing in and selling these players off. But for me, this is good, James, because this shows that not only, again, the one thing you can say about Ange is he's been a man of his word, and not only about a week or two ago, he was talking about ramping up this aggressive transfer policy, and it seems like that's the way this is going to go. I would not be surprised if it was Celtic that leaked this story to the press as opposed to Juranovic leaking it himself.
Yeah, I don't have a strong feeling on that, but I think that the other part of this is we have a locked and loaded, capable first team player to step in, meaning that, even if let's just say that it was Greg Taylor that this was the rumor about. Again, obviously it's not a completely different situation, but just hypothetically, I would have a little bit more anxiety that Bernabé would then be the number one, and there's no depth behind him to speak of that I know of, unless there's somebody, with the B team that I'm not aware of. So I have a lot more comfort that Ralston's the person that's going to step in here, because at the domestic level, he's proven that he's more than capable. If we've had this discussion in ways, he's actually been a superior option to Juranovic domestically against a lot of opposition, and so it's a question of depth then. Who's then, and to your point, whether that's a loan, whether that's somebody that you identify as a loan to buy, or maybe you bring in someone who's younger, more of a premium prospect for a larger amount that then has that, second half of the season to get into the system and, acclimated to the league and the culture and everything. So that's how you start this conveyor belt. And that's the great part, is we do have someone that I think is a very low risk person to absorb that production in those minutes. And I mean, that's ideal. Again, that's the idea. That's the idea here, is to be able to do this so that when you have someone to sell, the market conditions are right, the relationship is right for all parties involved, or most importantly for the club. that you're not taking a huge step down in quality in order to take advantage of the financial part of it. So here we're going to get the upside of the money. The production's going to remain comparable for the rest of the season, again, barring some kind of injury situation. Maybe lock and load the next guy stepped up for the depth, or maybe it's the person for next Champions League season that's a little younger that just needs some time to get ready for that level of competition. Win. Other than, again, this is the emotional part of it. If Juranovic is your favorite player, this sucks, right?
Mhm.
So, there's the supporter side of this, which is when you lose fan favorites, then, that's never fun. But from a ruthless analytics and kind of a business sense perspective, to me, it's a slam dunk.
Mm-hmm. I should say at this point that it's not confirmed that he's leaving the club. It's just that there are stories going around that he has rejected, or the talks have broken down between him and the club. So it looks like he's on the way out the door. I actually almost burst out laughing when you said that we don't have a low risk player for left back, because sure, Liam Scales is only on loan.
Does he have a callback option
next year?
Does he have a callback?
I'm pretty sure. Yeah, it's just a loan. It's not a loan to buy. So
yeah, rumors that Ange has deleted his number from his phone are scurrilous, I'm sure.
Short memories on this podcast that Liam Scales is only away on loan. That's the problem. No, look. So that's the Juranovic news of the day. We'll wait and see how that develops over the next couple of weeks. Let's hope he does have a good World Cup campaign with Croatia, because it would be nice to see a Celtic player doing well on the biggest scale in football. But we'll move on to the Ross County wins 2-1 to Celtic in the end, and Celtic go 9 points clear because of results elsewhere. This is best case scenario for Celtic, was drop points elsewhere and them to pick up 3 points, although it did look a little hairy at one point in time when Celtic were chasing the game and eventually got 2 brilliant goals, 2 absolutely touches of class from Hatate in parts of 2 of them. And Haksabanovic, I told you, I said when he gets his first goal, they're just going to keep on rolling. And that was a lovely finish at the weekend as well. So, look, Alan, I said on this channel on Monday or Tuesday, or wherever I did that video, that we weren't going to talk about VAR. I was not going to talk about VAR, but you insist that we must talk about the elephant in the room. So let's just, you did a brilliant article, it must be said, on your website, Celtic by Numbers, where you go through what your key issues are for this. So if you just want to outline your argument, and then we can unpick it from there.
Yeah, no problem. And I know you're only being playful, Enda, because my interest actually isn't in VAR. Is because, as far as I'm concerned, VAR is a process. It's a amalgamation of humans and technology and procedures, which many countries have already used for many years. Scotland's only just started using it. There are clearly a lot of teething problems, and we've clearly got a kind of pound shop version with only so many cameras and so forth. And there will be therefore issues because of that. That's all pretty boring to me, really. And that isn't actually what my article was about. Okay, my article was actually about the Scottish Football Association and its continuing toxic relationship with specifically Celtic Football Club, but I believe most of Scottish football, and that's the story. The story really was fairly comical about what happened that stopped there being it seems to be a lack of a definitive image to allow anyone to judge whether Jota was offside or not. But the Jota offside is really neither here nor there. The story here starts with the SFA statement that was issued in response to Celtic asking for clarification as to why Jota was ruled offside, given that there was no definitive image produced on the night of the game. And the SFA statement...
You need to get your eyes checked, Alan. That was so definitive, it wasn't even... I mean, come on. Get to the ophthalmologist.
The SFA statement, although very brief, managed to be incredibly revealing, and the level of ineptitude displayed in that statement is staggering for such a brief piece of public relations. It really was. I mean, the arrogance and dripping from it, throwing your broadcasting partner under the bus, taking no accountability for the fact that you are the accountable party for running the operation of VAR. It was just appalling. But what was the most interesting was the confirmation in that statement that the decision to give Jota offside had been taken in the VAR room. Because what that meant was they had to use the evidence available. And what we've clearly seen, and what hasn't been contradicted yet, is that that evidence was inconclusive. And when you look at that, and you look at it in the light of asking the question, well, what should they have done in that situation? Then this is where it starts to unravel for the SFA, because the way I framed it was I think they had three. I think David Dickinson, because it was David Dickinson that made the decision, not Willie Collum. Okay, the SFA have confirmed that. Willie Collum just, the ball went in the net. His linesman raised the flag. Over to you, VAR. And I think that David Dickinson, who was the lead VAR, was the senior VAR at the time, had three options. Okay, the first option I think was what I'll call the common sense option, and the common sense option to me was to tell the truth, right? Just tell the truth. And what was the truth? The truth was the camera was, for whatever reason, inoperable. We haven't got a definitive image. I'm sorry, Willie, we've screwed up. We'll sort it out in the wash up afterwards, and we'll all learn from it and move on. What I suggest you do in the meantime is go with the on-field decision. And they would have ruled it offside. And I would have been perfectly happy with that. And that is actually a sensible thing to have done. But they chose not to do that. So what did they do? They chose to choose the second option, which is to rule the goal offside. But the problem with that is that they've actually published guidance which very much mirrors the guidance that's been in operation in England, which you'll know more about than me, Enda, for 2 years, which is that they reckoned there was about 20 goals in the English Premier League in the 1920 season that really fell within an area of doubt that was probably too narrow. And so essentially what they did was they kind of thickened the lines, but essentially what they're saying, that's literally what they did. They thickened the lines that are used to assess the...
that's literally what they did this year. They just thickened the lines.
And then the rule of thumb now is if there's overlap between the lines, then it falls into the we can't be sure. And if we can't be sure, the default position is benefit of the doubt to the attacking side. And the SFA have issued guidance, which I got access to. It's public data, which shows that they follow the same protocol in that regard. So what David Dickinson should have done if he was following the manual would have been to say, well, clearly the image that I'm using is not definitive. Therefore, we default to benefit of the doubt to the attacking team, and they should have awarded the goal. But they didn't do that either. So they chose a third option, which was to disallow the goal. And as I say, what they then did in that appalling statement was infer that Hawkeye was in some way magical, and that by having a Hawkeye on the other 18-yard line and using the word calibration, the inference was that would magically allow you to still make the decision in the VAR room, which is what they did. Now, I would suggest if there is evidence that they have another image that they work from, then we should all see that. Otherwise, that looks like a very disingenuous, way of framing it. So you've got somebody who's not followed the procedures, and you've got a disingenuous way that the technology appears to have been used. So, and because the reality of it is that you need three components to marry up to be able to allow you to make a definitive call. You need a camera pointed at the incident. You need the Hawkeye technology to allow you to tell you what the position of objects were, and then you need a human being to look at the relative position of the objects, and the human being has to then draw the lines for then a decision to be made. All those things have to happen, otherwise you can't definitively say. So if the camera doesn't work and you're using a Hawkeye from 50 yards away, then inevitably you're compromised in terms of the quality of the decision you can make. So the reason that this is a problem, if everything that I've said is as it is, and there isn't any more evidence that someone's holding back, then the way I look at these things is I'm looking for patterns. And if you look throughout the recent history, there is a pattern of SFA deceit when it comes to Celtic. And I'm not making accusations here. This is a matter of public record. Jim Farry lied to Celtic, matter of public record. Dougie MacDonald and Hugh Dallas lied to Celtic. It's a matter of public record. And we know Alec Thompson, the well-respected Channel 4 investigative journalist, called out the revolving door that went on between Rangers and the SFA at the time that the EBTs were operational. Campbell Ogilvie was in the room when the first EBT was issued to the very first to Craig Moore. He was the company secretary, I believe, at the time, and he was the president of the SFA. He knew all about this and didn't do anything about it, right? So there's a toxic relationship that has always been there between Celtic and the SFA, and Celtic have been demonstrably misled and lied to by the SFA over many years. So this is a Dougie moment for the digital age. That's what this is. Okay, that's why it's important. Nothing to do with VAR, nothing to do with what side referees are on, who they support, which lodge they go to, bollocks like that. This is to do with the SFA. That's where we should be focusing our attention, and their relationship with specifically Celtic, but really, by extension, their relationship with 99% of the clubs in Scotland and the contemptuous way that they treat them. That's the issue. And this is another example of that.
I don't dispute that, okay? But I guess my biggest issue is that this is a systematic issue. This is the SFA pushing forward with VAR when neither the grounds nor the people using the technology are ready for it. They're not trained for it. They're not ready for it. And the grounds aren't ready for it. And where I fall on this issue is that, okay, we were playing against Motherwell in Fir Park. Fir Park isn't a decrepit ground. It's a big ground in Scottish football terms. 6 cameras is just not enough for this situation. And it was proven to be that case because I'm sure not many people have actually been in a director's box for football matches, but the guy operating that camera would have been told in.
Are you saying you have fancy pants? Is that what
I have? Yes, that is what I'm
make
implying.
sure. Okay.
So what's happening there is everybody is sitting in a room, and the director is going to say to the cameraman in his ear, "Get a B-roll shot of Ange reacting to whatever's going on the pitch," and that may or may not be used in the broadcast, but that's what the camera was essentially being used for, was B-roll. And my issue here, Alan, is that if the SFA had waited until they were ready from a technology standpoint, they would have had more than 6 cameras. They used 34 at a minimum in the Premier League, by the way, 34. So a multiplication of 6 compared to what we had in Motherwell the other day. If they did not push ahead, if they waited until they were ready with the technology and invested in it properly, there would be all of this evidence would be ready to go. We would have it there. There would not be these mistakes, and we would have further clarity on what's going on here. Because while I agree that all of what you're saying is correct, it would not happen if they did not make the mistakes in the first place, and they wouldn't cover their asses if they had just prepared correctly for this. Because that's what they're doing. They're just covering their ass here. Yeah. That's all they're doing.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's the story. The story isn't... So everything you're saying is correct.
There would be no asses to cover if they actually copped themselves on and funded the thing correctly.
Oh, there'd always be mistakes. The question is how you deal with the mistakes. And that's the biggest reveal for any company or any organization is how do you deal with mistakes? It's always the case. How do you deal with when things go wrong? And things always go wrong. Okay, so everything you've said is right, and it's probably atypical of such an antiquated, backward, mediocre, talentless organization like the SFA that they would implement it in this way. Absolutely, 100%. But that's not the story. The story, whether you had VAR or you didn't have VAR, the story is the SFA response to things going wrong. That's the issue. Nothing to do with VAR. I agree with what you're saying about VAR. I completely 100% agree with you. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about how that organization deals with a member club.
So what's the solution here?
The solution? Well, it's what is the reason for this? It's cultural. It's cultural. We know what the predominant culture in Scottish football has been for 150 years. And the SFA are a Henry McLeish did a study on Scottish football, 12 years ago, was it? And he talked about, how the fact that the culture of the SFA was, akin to that of a bowling club or a golf club, the sort of jolly boys club, and all the implications of that in terms of, it's there for like-minded people, and we all know what that means in the Scottish context, and just the mediocrity of it. They simply, it's not run like a modern organization in any sense. They've got far too many people, for example, working there. There are far too many people administrating football. You could streamline it, make it far more efficient, far more professional. Those are the things that need to happen. That's what McLeish said should have been done 12 years ago. All we can do is hope that Celtic, go into bat for Celtic in this regard. But also that we just keep putting pressure on, calling it out where we see it, and I hope that Scottish football one day modernizes itself in terms of its administration, because that's the core of the issue here. The core of this has always been the SFA, because and people get away with bad behaviour because the SFA allow them to.
Yeah. I've had to stop myself from laughing when you were talking about the old men's club, because I mean that's what so many football associations, people think they're these amazingly well-run businesses, when in reality they're old grey men in suits that have been in the same position for about 25-30 years and can't be moved because of old regulatory statuses. The FAI Ireland are a prime example of this. It took them 20 odd years and a mistake for the main man in charge, the CEO John Delaney. Took a mistake from him. It was pure corruption, and everybody knew about it.
Mistakes doing a lot of heavy lifting there, Enda.
No, it was no. What I mean is, he wasn't making mistakes. He knew what he was doing. But what I mean is, this was an open secret from the FAI that John Delaney was corrupt, that he was siphoning money out of the organizations, that there was bum deals all over the place. And it came down to him making a mistake by trying to take an injunction against one of an investigative journalist. And because he took the injunction, it went to the High Court and everything was exposed. And then that's when the House of Cards came crumbling down. So for me, I struggle with the SFA stuff, because when is that House of Cards going to crumble? What's going to cause that to crumble? And I think that comes from the press and the media and their responsibility in all of this, rather than fans. I don't think the burden of proof should fall onto the fans to try to prove that the SFA is corrupt, because that's where you see the breeding ground of sort of these conspiracy theories that grow.
Yeah, no, I mean this is why Resolution 12 was such a missed opportunity, because that was the smoking gun. Because that was all about the SFA and their decision to hand Rangers, as was a license to play in Europe in the 11-12 season. Sorry if I've got that wrong. Was it 10, 11, 12? I think it was 11-12 season. And the fact that they knew that there were tax arrears. They were overdue, and the license should not have been issued, and it was. Now, you can argue as to who lied to who, or who misled who, or who, what have you, but those are matters of fact established in court, and there's evidence, and it was all being provided to Celtic. That was a chance to fire a smoking gun, as it were.
James, you wanted to come in on this, I think, did you?
Yeah, I was just going to do a ridiculous analogy, which is, this, and actually I've heard this used in a broader context, which I think is a far better analogy. But with the entrance of the printing press in the 15th century, precipitated the great religious upheavals in Europe, the Reformations, and then the 30 Years' War, right? As people realized that the stuff that they were being shoveled, the nonsense, the gatekeepers with their, Latin and the information became democratized, and everyone realized, holy crap, this is quite the thing they've got going here. And it created all this upheaval. And the internet has largely kicked off a similar period, meaning that you've democratized and crowdsourced information. And within that context, like this is This is like a little mini fractal of that, which is what VAR is going to do here. Is it's going to make it so patently ridiculous for people who are in on it, meaning that the peddlers of, and I don't mean in a conspiracy sense, meaning that, you know, modern journalism has become, corporate journalism has become about access, right? And you can't, you know, sacrifice access in kind of oligopoly or monopolistic industries, or else you're out of business. Like, you can't really do hard investigative journalism, because if you put anyone's feet to the fire, they're going to can you. You're done. So this is, you're starting to see it, I think, is that kind of mainstream journalists are starting to say, I mean, how can you deny some of this stuff? The light's being shown on it. And the way Alan's documented this kind of stuff, it's getting to the point where, okay, your explanation could be reasonable and absent all of this other stuff. Right. And if you just kind of dropped in from Mars or from outer space and just saw this in its own essence, you could say, oh, it's just because they're incompetent and, you know, just happened to be the way that they dealt with it. And even Alan's chronicling of this, you could say, you know, in theory, it's due to incompetence. But that, you know, at some point, you just have to say, stop. Like, this is nonsense.
There's a pattern. There's a pattern. Yeah.
Well, right. And there's a pattern, and the logical sequencing of the pattern is such that, you know, you have to, you lose credibility, your own credibility as a journalist, as, you know, to the point where you fracture the audience. You lose completely any kind of relationship of trust. And we've been seeing that in media generally. I mean, God knows, it's being in America, living through the Trump era, that's what that's all about. So this is just another little symptom of that. And they're going to not be able to defend it in any kind of reasonable way. And then they just start gaslighting. So I think we're at that point now where we're going to go down just the pure gaslighting route, where they're just going to keep, you know, I love the one meme that goes around, you know, don't back down, double down, right? Triple down, quadruple down. They'll just keep gaslighting. Or the hope is maybe that they have to, because of the pressure that builds. And even outside of, you know, Celtic, I mean, again, it's this is not happening in isolation. This is not all about culture. There's also, or I should say that it is the culture, but it's the culture of low standards and you know, accepting mediocrity or worse, and that Alan has rightfully talked about in recent weeks as well, is about putting people in bad position. The quality just isn't there. So that's where this all gets really messy, is because how much of it is this all stuff that we kind of all know is there, and they're making, what VAR's doing is shining a light that it's there, on top of the incompetence, on top of the low quality, on top of all of these other things. And I would think that a lot of, you know, again, because a lot of these clubs are reasonably professional, and you're getting more and more serious people getting involved in different ways in ownership with these different clubs. You know, you would think there would be more of a push to say enough is enough. We need to act like this is a credible sporting enterprise, and not just, you know, the Tiger King of global football.
Yeah, I mean, listen, change is always very slow, and then it happens all of a sudden, right? So there's a couple of things that are happening, okay, at the moment, which I'm not saying to you, Enda, are going to be golden bullets, silver bullets, whatever, but they're just indicative of, maybe it's all pressure builds, okay? So a couple of things. One is, you know, there were no Scottish referees at Euro 2020. There are no Scottish referees, that, as far as I'm aware, that refereed in any of the latter stages of any of the major European club competitions last year, and I don't remember seeing any in the Champions League group stages either. Right, that starts to become noticeable. There's no Scottish referees going to the World Cup. That's appalling. You know, as one of the founder members, as a member of the IFAB board, right? That's appalling. As people should start to talk about that and notice that. Okay. The second thing is, in terms of the overall competence of the Scottish Football Association, is that these financial sustainability rules are very interesting, and they're very interesting in very dull ways. But very dull ways are ways that people use to manage things better. the most interesting things are often very dull. So what do I mean by that? So the whole premise, when the cornerstone of the financial sustainability rules is the quarterly reporting. And the quarterly reporting is quite demanding in terms of the amount of information that has to be provided, financial information I'm talking about. But the key thing is that in previous times, that information would have been A, requested annually, and B, it would have been delegated to the local association to gather that information and then to make a decision on things like licensing. So by centralizing that in UEFA, what UEFA are saying is effectively, we don't trust some of you to do your jobs properly, and you know what, because the guy who's in charge of UEFA licensing, Treviso, is the guy who wrote to Celtic shareholders confirming that as far as UEFA were concerned, there was no point in pursuing the old Rangers because they were a different club, and therefore they couldn't be fined or anything because it was now a new club. And he confirmed that in writing as a letter that from the head of UEFA licensing that confirms this. Treviso is the one who is the one who has put together the new financial, part of one of the architects of the financial sustainability rules, and he knows what goes on in Scotland. And I'm not saying that the financial sustainability rules are a result of Scottish SFA. As you can imagine, around Europe and all the different countries, there are many SFAs that are a bit rogue and got bad practices. So this is in response to many, many issues, many factors, I am sure. But the point is that this is a very, very different way of doing things, and essentially it's taking authority and control away from the SFAs and essentially saying, you weren't doing this properly. This is how we're going to do it from going forward. I used to work for a global organization, and this was a constant battle between, you guys in the regions are not doing this properly. We're going to start doing this globally. And it's a constant tension. But so there's just a couple of examples there of how things are one thing which is going to start to become very noticeable and people are going to start asking questions, and then another which is a very different way of doing things that is going to shine a light on how things were done previously.
Yeah, and I should clarify as well that when I talk about not wanting to talk about VAR, I don't mean to stick my head in the sand and just pretend that all this isn't going on, and I get as annoyed as most people do with these decisions. But my problem is that, except for today, today was a much better example of how you can actually discuss VAR as a wider issue. How many people listen to multiple Celtic podcasts and every single one of them will just be talking about VAR for 25 to 30 minutes? That's just what I don't want this to become.
No, I'm with you.
And it's fine to make noise, and it's fine. It's all that there. But what I tend to do is I tend to switch off because there's too much information ends up being drowned out. That's why, for example, you don't hear about every single atrocity in the world all the time, because people just eventually just become numb to it because they don't want to listen to all this bad stuff. So I think there's a fine line between us discussing VAR and every podcast in Scotland becoming the VAR show as opposed to what happened on the pitch. So that's sort of my key issue with this, is that we end up down a rabbit hole where Sky Sports are talking about it, the Record are talking about it, 20-Minute Tims are talking about it, Axum are talking about it, 67 Hill are talking about it, we're talking about it, and every single person's just talking about the exact same thing, which is essentially what I don't want to go down every single week. So that's more my stance
I'm with you
on VAR and not
I'm with you. Listen,
the broader situation that we're talking about.
So Enda, that makes absolute sense, and no issue with any of that because, as you say, people will always make poor decisions. Where I want to get to is a place where people make poor decisions, and those decisions are randomly distributed amongst all the clubs because, and that's just the way it is, and that isn't particularly interesting. But we're not there yet. So the reason that I also do the honest mistakes thing is because I guess I instinctively know that there's a cultural problem here, and I genuinely want to understand how does it manifest itself in the data. That's where I'm coming at it from.
Mm-hmm.
But to do that, you have to filter out a lot of the noise that you're talking about, because I get really frustrated when I go onto Twitter after every single weekend, and there's this scattergun approach of people throwing, oh, look at this, did you see that call? And that, it's like, whoa. 90% of what you've just described is probably the right decision, right? If probably more.
Yeah.
So that's why I get a neutral person to look at it and focus just on those small number of incidents. And it is a small number of incidents that are nevertheless key to a game, which are actually wrong. And then you sort of say, once you've filtered out all that noise, you know, what is the pattern? That's the perspective I'm coming at it from. Not to go, you know, it's like how all that fuss on Saturday with the referee sending people off the pitch when they were injured or not sending off the pitch. Everything he did was exactly within the law 5 of the game. That just creates so much noise and so much unnecessary negative energy, and it actually shrouds what should be the interesting aspect, which is the pattern of behaviour of the referee around some of the small things, some of the, that's a foul when it's a Celtic player, but it's not a foul when it's a Ross County player. And we've seen that quite a few times recently. And then, you know, the interpretation of the handball rule, again, another refreshingly, variable interpretation of that law. These are the key things. You know, there's so many noise things that you got to filter out, and I think we're agreeing on that point for sure. But what I will continue to do is to look for patterns in the data. Well, that's what it comes down to.
I think overall we are agreeing upon pretty much everything. We're just coming across from it from two different perspectives. Ultimately,
I think the other issue here is that when you go down the rabbit hole of and completely valid, justified, understandable rabbit hole, right? But then as you start going deeper and deeper down the hole, all of a sudden everything gets turned into a conspiracy of cheating, right? So you go from, okay, there is some cheating going on, there's some questionable decisions, there's, you know, all these things that we've talked about already on the show here, that are fairly nuanced and complicated to the point where there's like a overt effort to, screw Celtic, not only on the grand scale, but on every single call. Right. So now almost every call now gets to be like just a hysterical, barrage of accusations that the referee's a cheat. And again, this is where you get back to this mosaic between competence and cheating, and how, you know, it's been my view that the vast majority of this is they're just awful referees to a large degree, with some of these other things that we're talking about that on the margins absolutely have a huge material impact. But how do you kind of break it down between those? It gets really complicated. And this goes back to the things that Alan talks about so proficiently about credibility and transparency, and how
trust, remove doubt.
Exactly.
Remove doubt.
Yeah.
Don't have referees whose brother plays for Rangers. Remove the doubt. And then it will become a question of competence. It will be a question, which is fairly dull to discuss, and it will be evenly distributed. But at the moment, it's not seen to be that way. So there's no trust because of that doubt. That's
so let me give an example, because I've encountered a lot on Twitter in the last couple of years, and I actually did a little bit of work on it to kind of see the degree of it. But I think we'd probably agree, the three of us, that Celtic for sure. I'd also argue to agree, not to the same degree, but in the same direction of travel, that Celtic and Rangers get officiated different than the rest of the teams in the league, almost like a sympathy thing, meaning that these poor small clubs are trying to compete against the two monsters in Glasgow, and therefore they tend to get officiated differently. I think there's also reasonable evidence that it tilts even more so against Celtic in that regard. But the fact, the idea that the fouling rate disparity between Celtic relative to possession is an ironclad justification for this wide scale cheating. Again, I've done the work on it. It's just not, it's not good. It's not a quality piece of evidence to make that argument. And this becomes the problem, is that when you start levying accusations to support an argument that are provably shaky at best, probably not good at all, then you start undermining, right? So if the idea here is to influence and to try to stick to things like Alan has done in his article that are tangible, provable, legitimate, I think that's the pathway to get change, at least theoretically, and not, you know, taking everything that you can grab out and, you know, lob it in as a hand grenade to try and prove a point.
Agreed.
I think that
weakens the legitimate arguments. It does.
That's my concern. So, you know, it's not that I don't want these things to happen. It's just that, you know, and honestly, I thought it's intuitive. Like, I don't think it's crazy to think that possession should correlate with foul rate, right? So, I mean, I think that's a reasonable kind of conclusion to come to. But actually, when you delve into it, not so much, because it depends on style of play and disparity, and, you know, so there's a lot of nuances to it. So, so yeah, that's the only other thing I wanted to say, is because it's, you know, I think there's a direction of travel. A lot of supporters we're all kind of pulling in the same direction, but the big question, and I think it's a really good one, is, okay, well, how do you actually make it change? Like, how do we, instead of just pissing and moaning about this, like, what's going to actually make it get better or address it? And, you know, in my mind, going on and on about things that are tough to prove, if not, you know, there's a pretty good argument to disprove them, is not productive.
Yeah. So I think we'll park it on minute 52 of the podcast. And this is one of the reasons why I don't particularly like going down these routes, is that you can talk for days about it without actually reaching any endpoint. And
no one's watching us. Everyone was watching Scotland play Turkey anyway, right?
Well, yeah, that's
huge friendly.
That is the game on everybody's mind, is Scotland against Turkey. Well, do you have the score there? No.
2-1. Turkey won.
2-1 to Turkey. Okay.
Yeah.
There was a game at the weekend in amongst the VAR discussions, and that was Celtic 2, Ross County 1. There was a penalty given against Celtic, and look, again, we're not going to go into that, because I think we've done enough on the VAR discussions for this evening. But I guess, Alan, really quickly, 2-1 Celtic, 9 points clear. Best case scenario that we could have hoped for from this weekend. A bright spark from the weekend is definitely Rio Hatate.
Yeah, although there was a few. I mean, you know, undoubtedly, I'm not being contrarian, because I mean, he produced the moments, the magic moments that actually won the game, and so for that reason alone, I wouldn't disagree with him being man of the match. But I just thought it was telling, the reaction, because, you know, okay, I'll not dive into the specifics of the penalty. I'll wait for my expert to come back to me on that one. But what it undoubtedly did do, on the back of other sort of either perceived or real injustices in the first half in terms of some of the decisions, was it absolutely, you know, fired up the park at Celtic Park crowd, and there was a sort of, you know, almost like a seething cauldron from the 50th minute. And what I thought was really interesting was the reaction of certain players to that, and the reason, and it was in my mind because I wrote an article on Moritz Jens last week, and I still, and because of that, I looked obviously at Starfelt and Carter Vickers, and I still have this, you know, why is Starfelt so, you know, he comes out so badly in the data in terms of defensive actions, and this, you know, I'm not saying that my methodology is foolproof, but it's proved pretty accurate over the last sort of 7 years in terms of, you know, matching the outcomes and who ended up being really good and who actually, you know, we got rid of and all that sort of thing. And Starfelt's right down the bottom of that data. But I think there's something of this about, you know, the whole Postecoglou thing of, you know, he looks at the man first and the data second, if you like, or the you know, and what occurred to me was there were certain players that just seemed to really positively respond to the adversity and really sort of try and take the game by the scruff of the neck. We talked about O'Reilly doing that against Dundee United. I think he did it again, you know, because he felt a personal injustice having been pinged for the handball incident. But he personally drove on. I thought David Turnbull was terrific. He really tried to drive the team forward. Carter Vickers and Starfelt. I think the thing with Starfelt, just to finish on that point, as I say, is that I just think I think the manager just thinks he's somebody that he's happy to have in the trenches with him. And he's somebody he's an aggressive defender, he's a good character, he's a strong leader, and his game doesn't get disrupted by mistakes. We've seen this. We saw what a terrible start he had to his Celtic career, and he's just come back from injury, but he just gets on with it. And I think it's that sort of attitude that the manager likes. And I thought we saw that. I thought Celtic fed off the energy of the crowd, but also were really calm about their business. If you notice, they don't get involved in any nonsense off the ball. They don't get involved with other players. They don't argue necessarily with the referee. They're very focused on their work, and I think that comes from the manager. And I think we saw that. You see that. We talked earlier about you see the true nature of things when they're stressed. We talked about companies when they make mistakes. That's when you see them in their true light and how they deal with these mistakes. Celtic were under the cosh there. There was a real chance to end this mini break in the season on a high, and it was under threat because 50 minutes, 1 goal down, an opponent that had been playing really well. They were very coherent about I thought they alternated between their low block and they pressed really intelligently. In fact, even at the end of the first half, I was thinking Ross County, this is a template for how Celtic should play in Europe. They were very focused in their pressing efforts. They were very, they only did it occasionally and they did it very well. And then the rest of the time, they had this very, very solid organisation. Celtic were in a little bit of a hole, but they very calmly got themselves out of it. And certain players that I've mentioned just went about their business, upped their tempo a little bit, and sort of dragged Celtic over the line. And actually, by the time that Celtic had scored their 2 goals, Ross County were pretty much spent. They had nothing left. And Celtic were able to then see out the game very comfortably. And actually, the end stats for the game were as comfortable as many others have been. So I just thought it was, again, a really mature performance that just highlighted the upside of the way the manager looks at the personalities and the character of the players that he's selecting, and how that can manifest itself when it's stressed in situations such as this.
James?
Yeah, I think it's just a continue. I'm not going to, because we're getting close to the hour here, but so I'll just say ditto to everything Alan said relative to, kind of battening down the hatches and really getting through the game. And this speaks to what we've talked about the last couple of weeks about, kind of this pseudo December period where you just need to get through it. And I think what's so impressive is that we're getting through it in just a high, like everything else domestically under Ange, just at a higher level, right? So even in the games where we're kind of struggling a little bit, or you have an opponent that's actually coherent and implementing a smart game plan, the end result from a performance perspective is coming out in a way that it's just really impressive. And the consistency of it as well is what's so impressive. So, to me, what this suggests, particularly with us now being out of Europe, when everyone gets back from the World Cup, is, you never want to jinx things too much, but it's going to be really difficult to close a gap on us with this situation. Rangers will have to be nearly perfect in order to put any kind of pressure on us. I think. I don't think that they can much drop anything in the second half to even theoretically put this into a title race. So that's the cheerful part of this to me, is that if there was going to be a time of the season, it was going to be this piling up of the fixtures. The second round in the league was a little bit tougher than the first relative to where we were going. We still have to go to Ibrox, obviously, but generally speaking, the fixtures were kind of swinging back in a tougher direction. So, the fact that from a performance perspective, you're going to have 38 games. You're going to have the squeaky bum 2-1s and that kind of situations. But for us to basically have one game that's been an issue, it's just so impressive.
I always think that people look at professional football in a different way to normal, everyday amateur sports, which in a way it is right, but you also have to look at this from a perspective of human beings. And I thought the reaction from the players after the game told you all you needed to know about what they felt that they had achieved by getting over the line. Yeah, you look at Jota running into the goal as a substitute, firstly to win back the ball and get the ball back into play very quickly after the first goal. But then you look at the reaction from Ainge, the reaction from the players. That was a real fuck yeah moment for the players. They're like that's the type of game there where you just feel absolutely 10 foot tall after winning because you faced adversity and you got through it. And that for me is what a champion's team is built upon. It's these little wins here where, you know, you can go and batter St. Mirren or whoever it is 6-0 and that's fine. It builds confidence. But these games for me, these wins, they mean a lot more to a team and bringing the team together as a unit overall. I think that's what I was most pleased about was they were able to come back and it looked like it. They really would have been very pleased with that win.
And I think what it also opens up, and we've talked about this kind of hypothetically, but it starts to add more credence, I think, to the potential for this to be, you know, kind of a template. You know, one of the seasons and teams, domestic campaigns that get put in that rarefied air. You know, the Invincibles. You know, where you have one of those seasons where you know, the performance levels are just so good, not only from an underlying perspective, but as importantly, or obviously more importantly, is, you know, racking up 100+ points, scoring 105+ goals, you know, those kind of things that I think are more and more coming up. Like it's, you know, maybe not likely yet, but the potential there is really going up on the probability scale.
Mm-hmm. And we're not leaning on. Sorry, Enda, we're not leaning on one or two players. You know, people were questioning Maeda. Maeda comes on at Motherwell, gets the crucial second goal with a brilliant piece of technical skill and running. You know, Turnbull's hardly been in the team that much. He set up that goal, and then he's got the opener on Saturday and played really well. Haksabanovic is new, settling in. Suddenly he's scoring a few key goals. Bernabe came in. I thought he was terrific. As well, so everybody's contributing. Is what I'm trying to say in a very long-winded way. Is that, you know, we're not leaning on Kyogo, we're not leaning on Callum McGregor. McGregor's not even played for weeks, right? So everybody's contributing, and that's the key thing.
Yeah, big time. St. Mirren were obviously the worst example I could possibly have picked up for hammering, given they're the only team that have beaten us this season. But listen, we live and learn. They're a team that I remember Celtic beating 6-0 at one point in time. So look, there is one game for Celtic to look forward to, and that's tomorrow morning in the Sydney Cup, 8:45 a.m.
Is it tomorrow morning?
Is the kickoff time.
I didn't know.
Yes, I think so. 8:45 a.m. I think. I'm not sure if that's the local time that is kicking off, but
it's UK time.
Yeah,
UK time.
That's UK time because for me it's 3:45 a.m. So I will not be watching that one live.
I'll just be getting up.
It's on Celtic TV. Yeah. So you'll be able to see the rerun, James, if you got Celtic TV. So yeah.
I think we will.
That's a little bonus from my day.
Listen, it's always good to have these games, especially when we're going into a windowless weekend of football. So hopefully anybody who is watching in Australia, I know quite a few people tune in from Australia. I hope you really enjoy having Celtic in your country. It must be amazing to finally get to see them in person. So I hope everyone enjoys the Sydney Cup if you're an Aussie, and if you're going to be watching at home, then enjoy that as well. Look, we will be continuing on with the podcast even when we have the World Cup. So if you have any suggestions of anything that you want us to cover in depth, do leave them in the comments or send us a tweet at Huddle Breakdown as well. We'll try cover as much ground in depth as we can over the next couple of weeks while the World Cup is on as well. So that is our podcast for today. My thanks to Alan and James as always, and to you for listening and watching and tuning in on YouTube. If you want to get us, it's Huddle Breakdown on YouTube if you want to subscribe and see us every week, or if you want to listen to us, you can get us in the usual places on Spotify, iTunes, and wherever you get your podcast. Until next time, we'll chat to you later. Good luck.